I'm Tyler Collins, driver of the number 11 Masterbuilt Crate Late model, based out of Vernon, Indiana. I've won one feature over the last 3 years I've been racing. My first year I was Rookie of the Year at Brownstown Speedway, and looking to add a whole lot more feature wins going into this third season.
Okay. So this is your third season, right? Your experience, I would say, is deeper than 3 seasons of racing, because your father and uncle race, right?
Yeah, I was brought up around racing. My uncle has ran a super late model since I think about '87, and so before I was born, and then I grew up going to the tracks with him, and we ran racetracks, and I was helping out when I was little on his car, and once I became old enough, I wanted to drive and couldn't afford 2 cars, so I got a job basically just so I could start racing. And as soon as I could save up enough money and buy my own car, I went and did just that, and got started this going into my third year, so 2 years ago, the beginning of 2017. Bought a car the winter of 16, and just sold it the year before and bought a brand new car over this winter to get ready for this season.
Cool. All right. So I've made it to where with you, but I'm gonna restate my purpose for those watching this video. So I'm looking at the cost of crate late model racing and how the purpose of this class is to be an entry level kind of foot in the door for those who are interested in the sport, mm-hmm. and for those who want to throw money at a car. And I'm kind of looking at everything that I've looked at, from all the driver testimony and promoter feedback, like I've read on racingnews.co and some other places. But we're looking at the cost of crate late model racing, and it's a lot of people are saying that it's starting to dabble to the high side. It's no longer, it's never been cheap, but it's no longer the affordable entryway that it has been. What are your thoughts? Would you say that it's affordable, or would you say that the rules are kind of making it to where it's less cost friendly?
I'd say it's definitely a mix of both. So the trouble with crate late model racing is it is supposed to be the entry level class, and we're all on the same engine platform, and trying to even the competition out to where you're not going out and spending. I think the high-end engines now are over $60,000 for a fresh super or unlimited engine. But then you also have to look at the fact that we are late models, and the late model is the top end of dirt stock car racing. If you go the other spectrum, we're the same as a sprint car. They're the top end of the open racing. So if you find it unaffordable, there are classes that are under a late model, but at the same time, you don't want this to get out of hand to where you're becoming a super, or where you're in the same budget as a supercar, because then they're racing for 2, 3, 4 times the amount of money typically to win each race, and there's only a handful of big money crate features out there, and so you're never going to get the money back that you put in. But it is starting to get to a point where it's out of hand for the weekly racers such as myself. Now, I did just to keep up. I had a fast car last year, but to keep up with what's going on, I had to get a new car, which is a lot of money out of the pocket. The biggest trouble that I see with evening everybody out onto the engine playing field is where we're all roughly in the same area power-wise, is that once you get everybody that close, the details start becoming way more relevant. So whereas in an open class, if you all were kind of varying on horsepower or having a lot more horsepower, you could give or take a little on your setup. You could miss your setup a little bit, or your shocks might not be quite up to par, but you could have a good night and still run good and still have enough power to keep up with a lot of the good competition. Whereas now, you put everybody into the same field, and tenths of a second suddenly became a lot more needed. If you were able to pick up just a few horsepower by spending a lot more money, that's a huge difference when everybody else is at the same. So there's a lot of guys out there like you instead of buying a GM engine for $6,500, you now have to spend $14,000 to go buy one that somebody else bought from GM and completely went through it and make sure it was to the best possible spec. And that, while you could get the engine from GM that would be the same as them, you don't know that, and you're guaranteed with that it is. Or now, high-end shocks cost $7,000-8,000 all the way around your car, but you might not necessarily need those unless you were doing the absolute highest level of super racing. Local shows you can get away without those, but now people have introduced those and they had the money and they brought them into crate cars. Well, they're going to outrun you because they can get every single one of their bits of horsepower to the ground now with those better shocks, whereas you can't. So again, instead of being a little bit here, a little bit there, it becomes a lot of bit because everybody's already so close together. And a lot of manufacturers have realized this, and where the market has switched to with this crate racing, and the prices have gone up for simple things like rear end used to be kind of just across the board. It's a rear end's a rear end. For a quick change, you could get it from a few different companies, but they're all roughly the same price. Buy a brand new one for $1,500, $2,000 maybe. And now they have these rear ends that have lighter weight internals and lower drag, and they help you get they don't really help a supercar at all because you're not going to notice 4 or 5 more horsepower to the ground difference, but you do in a crate car. And now these rear ends cost $3,500, $4,000.
Yeah.
And it's just when manufacturers started realizing where the profit margin could be in little bits, and that there were people out there that have extra money and they don't really care. This is their hobby, and they have all kinds of money, more than they know what to do with, and they love racing. And I love that they put money into racing because it's what keeps our sport alive, but it also kills it because these guys can afford to spend that money, go out there, and instead of going open racing, go crate racing, where they think they have a better shot of winning because they can outmoney the competition a little easier. And it really puts the little guys like my team kind of out of it in respects to those big races like I was talking about. There's not very many of them, but you get a lot of the big name drivers that get into these high-end teams, and there's really, once you start doing that, there's no difference in us and unlimited racing, where we almost need the same budget in order to compete at a national level. So they're part numbers from GM, the last 3 digits being 602 and 604. They're both 350 cubic inch Chevys based off the old LT1 and the Corvettes and stuff, but minor tweaks. But the 602 has 50 less horsepower. It has cast iron heads, and it has a cast crank. And then the 604 has aluminum heads and a forged crank and better internals, and it makes 400 horsepower. And of course, that's the engine that everybody chooses to go with. It's price-wise, it's as from GM, I think like $1,500 more expensive, but you get the extra 50 horse and a crate. Like I was saying earlier, 5 horsepower is huge in a crate car. 50 is just, crazy. And a lot of things that these engines, when you buy them and you put them in your car, they're supposed to run for a long time, and mostly they do. But then when you get them rebuilt and people start pushing them you have to stay within tolerances in the engine. And the engines are supposed to be sealed from the manufacturer, and if you're caught cheating, then you're banned and stuff like that. But people, like I said, still push the limit and get the engine the most out of it that they possibly legally can. Well, once you do that, then you also kind of put more stress on the engine and decrease its life. And now you're going to have to pay for engine rebuilds more often. And an engine rebuild for one of those is more expensive than it would be for a a normal engine of the same kind because it has to be resealed, and people have again jumped on that where they know that you have to come to them to have the engine rebuilt because you can't do it yourself, like my dad would do with our unlimited engine, where a rebuild would be, if you didn't need major parts, $700-800. Now you have to spend $3,000 because somebody certified has to do it, and if you have to have that done more often, that's just eating into more and more of your weekly running costs.
Okay. So, looking at with you running a crate late model, what would you say an average night would cost you? Calculating like tires, fuel, entry fee.
So I try and do a good job about making sure I don't get too far out of budget for what I can afford. So I try and keep a good track of how much everything costs me. This year it got a little bit more expensive because of a rule change, and they opened up the fuel rule that we're allowed to use, and there's more expensive fuels out there that make a little bit more power, 5 or 10 being all, but I used to just get pump gas, 93 octane, $3 a gallon, and now I have to pay a little over $600 for a 54-gallon drum of this fuel because it gives me a little bit more power, and I burn through about 10 gallons a night. That cost me $120, I think, a night in fuel. That's what that averaged out to. And then tires, if you want to be competitive now, you have to be on new, people came in and they were putting new tires on every night. Well, now that's what you have to do if you want to run with them, because nothing performs like a new tire. So tires, I have to spend about $200 a week also. And then oil factors into that and a few other things. I think my running costs this year altogether added up every week, if I don't break anything provided. I just went in and paid myself pit pass and bought everything I needed. It's a little south of $600. It's somewhere, it was like $540 a night for racing. So to put that in better perspective, a weekly night of racing on almost any local track around here, if you finish any worse than third place, you lost a lot of money, because almost everywhere around here is under $400 past third place. It's $800 to win, $500 or $600 for second, and then $400 or $500 for third, and then it drops considerably more on back. And if I barely finish a race, I get usually about $120 to $140 of start money. So, I just lost, like $300.
Yeah. So with that being said, there's a wide spectrum of stuff you can do to have to keep up with these faster cars. With that being said, do you think that the classes, the crate class especially, should be restricted to a more black and white set of rules, or parts that you're allowed to use to help keep the cost and the competition closer together? Or do you feel like that it should be left to go the way it is and see what the outcome would be? What are your thoughts on the cost?
I think we're a little bit too far gone to completely rein everything back in now. I don't think it's completely out of that's what I would like to see happen, if a black and white set of rules, like you said, that where you could really get these cars under control cost management wise. But there's so many guys out there that are so far, out of the spectrum that they would almost need it to be divided, which you'd hate to. The more you divide, the less cars you're going to have on race night, because the more classes you divide up into, you can't take 20 cars in one class and divide that class in two and expect to have 20 cars in each class again.
Yeah.
But if we were able to tires, like I said, that tires is one of the biggest costs. People can spend the money up front, but those weekly costs really get to you at the end when it's all said and done, and having to go through that many tires every week. And I should be buying more than I am to really be running like I want to. If you made like a rule where you can't groove your tires or sipe your tires or groove. You know, a lot of people, you put a lot of grooves in a tire, and it'll get you a lot more speed, especially on a wet track. But it also is going to decrease the life of your tire by 2 or 3 races. And if you could make a rule, and then that also helps you out in 2 aspects, because the people who have been around longer and can also pay for somebody to help them. So, these guys, a lot of people I race against, they have paid help, which I definitely could. I don't even dream about being in that position where I could pay somebody to help with my racing. But that guy knows, has knowledge of the best ways to groove its type of tire, and also has the time where he can do more of them in a week. After I get done working my 40, 50 hours at work to pay for everything, and then go work on the car, maintenance and everything takes a lot of time, and then tire prep, by the time you mount it, and sometimes you have to spend a little time letting it soak with more air in it to swell it, get the right sizes that you want. Then you have to spend an hour and a half or 2 hours grooving and siping each one. And if you have to do 2 or 3 tires a week, that's just eating into a bunch of time where you can't spend doing something else. So tires would be a really good way to bring everybody into a more even playing field, to where if you were all on the same tire and it wasn't as good of a tire, the horsepower wouldn't matter as much. And then shocks would be another huge thing. As long as the guys can go out there and spend the extra money to get the horsepower, but if you limit how they can get the horsepower to the ground, then it's not making a big difference. So shocks already being expensive, it solved that in 2 ways. If you could get everybody on a uniform shock that was cheap, say $300, $400 per shock, and limit them on what, seal them the same way they seal engines, which some companies have started doing. So you can have these shock absorbers that are uniform across the board for every driver, and you have to run these shocks, and you can put your springs on them. So you don't want to take the racing aspect out of racing. You still want people to be able to have different set. You don't want everybody to just jump out and go into the same car, because then, like I said, that's taking the racing part out of racing. Yeah. You're letting drivers go out there, but the other, driving the car is only a small percentage of it. And a lot of, races are won with where your head is at in the garage, and how you do your maintenance, and how you want to set up your car, and what springs and things you choose to do to it. So you don't want to try and really constrict the rules too much, because then that makes people lash out and push gray areas and cheat anyway. So if you could find a nice medium of getting the shocks, getting the tires reined in, the engines, you're going to have a lot of trouble getting those manufacturers that take those engines and rebuild them. You're going to have a lot of trouble getting those out of there. So you can limit the fuel, and that'll which around here it used to be, which helped out a lot. But once it got opened up one place, it got opened up as another, to be fair, so we could still run at different tracks. And like I said, once you can put a cost put cost savings in the right areas, the other areas will rein themselves back in, because you won't be able to use all that extra power that you might be getting from, more expensive headers and the best transmissions that have less rotating weight in the rear ends. If you can't get all that extra freed up power to the ground, then it's not going to make any difference.
Yeah. And would you say that the crate late model classes, would you say the field is growing right now, or do you think that it's hit kind of like a plateau?
It seems to me kind of, it's hard to tell. Right over the winter, I saw a lot of people getting cars. Social media makes it really nice for keeping track of what all my other competitors and people are doing in the off season. And I saw a lot of people who were buying cars and saying they were going to go racing this year, and they didn't make it out. We had the first night this weekend, and I'm hoping they are. I have seen what appears to be like growth, but there's also, it's hard to say that it's actually growth, because there are also people leaving. So once there's people, you can get started in crate late model racing fairly cheap. If you have, $6,500, you can buy a race ready car typically.
Yeah.
But the thing is, that's just enough to get you out there with everyone. That's not enough to get you into victory lane unless you have a very, very fortunate night and you happen to be at the right track and everything. You know, it's like almost like winning the lottery at that point if you have a car like that. And you have to be a very good driver too. But that gets people excited. They think, I can be in a late model for the X amount of dollars, and that's awesome. And I love that's what crate late model is supposed to be, kind of. But you don't want it to be too cheap because you want the other classes to be able to survive too. You want the Hornets, and you want the pure stocks, and you want the super stocks and modifies. You want all those other classes to have just as many cars too, because people, having all the different cars racing is what makes Saturday nights even more special. You're not just watching one class out there the whole time. But once people realize that, they spend $8,000 and bought a race ready car and they got in and they started, racing, and they got a year of experience under their belt, and they're like, okay, I'm getting pretty good at this. I'm ready to step it up and start doing better. And then, you can buy a decent car that can, finish pretty good for, I'd say a little under, $15,000, $12,000 to $15,000. You can buy a good race ready crate car that you can go win at some places on a lucky night. You're not going to be dominant, really, I'd say, by any means, but you can run very well. And then you realize that, well, I've done that for a year or two, and now I'm ready to make the next step, and I really want to start winning races, because that's why people are out there to have fun, but it is racing, and a lot of people get that I want to win, and I really I want to keep winning, and then you see the price tag on what a car to do that costs. What is it going to cost me to get a car that I can go anywhere and win in? And then it jumps astronomically, and you're no longer in the budgeted range. You're in a high-end sports car range. You can have like that car that you see your rich friend driving. You're like, man, I wish I had that one, but that's in a race car. And that's when people start getting back out of it, because they're like, I can't afford to race how I want to race. So I either drop down in classes, or just some friends of mine have just kind of quit racing altogether. And so I would say it's kind of at a plateau, but it's still growing a little bit. If we can rein the cost back in, it would shoot up very quickly, I think.
Okay. And so I've noticed last year the car counts around here haven't been too bad. I know that in some portions of the more Midwest area, looking out towards the Great Plains, they've had some troubles getting car counts specifically for this reason. I know that some promoters have ditched crates, and it's either modifies or pros. They're kind of trying to separate, where they're going to pay the money. And I think a big portion of that is because of the cost. It's kind of hard. It's hard to have a class when you got 12 cars show up.
Yeah, it's really hard. When you get to the higher end classes of racing, they don't pay for themselves. So crates aren't. I personally feel like we don't, because of how the costs have evolved, we don't get paid enough to compensate for those costs, which is one way that they were kind of hoping would help the class regulate itself. But like I said, when you have the big money guys out there who don't care how much it is to win, it could be $200 to win. They have the money to blow anyway. You're not hurting them. You're just hurting the guys who are trying to still run with them. But like I said, we don't pay for ourselves. So if 20 of us show up, in a pit pass, you're only averaging maybe 3 or 4 guys that come with every person. Well, it's $30 to get in, and 30 times 4 is $120. Well, that's your start money. That guy just took home the same amount of money. He finished last. He took home the same amount of money he brought in. If the guy who wins, he just took home $680 more than he put in if he brought 3 people with him. The little classes pay for the big classes. and because they don't take they usually put in more into the fans. They don't take home any money, but from like a promoter's aspect, you can't. No more fans are going to show up to watch 8 to 12 cars race. That's not why the fans are there. The fans are going to be flooding in to watch the other classes that have 20 cars that are putting on a really good show. And the same can be said if you have a few dominant guys in the area and everybody's showing up because they know this guy's going to win or this guy's going to win. Like, people don't show up to see that kind of racing. They don't, they'll sit at home on Facebook and they'll say, oh yeah, so-and-so won again. They show up to the track to watch good racing, and that's why if I go as a spectator, that's why I want to go. I don't personally, I don't really root for anybody. I root for good racing, and because that's why I love the sport. And if you don't have the car counts that can sustain fans, then you can't run the class.
Yeah.
It's economic standpoint. You have to do what makes sense because they're running it as a business, and I can't blame them for shutting down, certain types of racing when it starts to really hurt their pocketbook.
Yeah, I know with getting on asphalt, Mike Harmon in NASCAR, he's a prime example. He's doing his best to stay afloat with the rising costs in motorsports altogether. But, I think for now, that'll just about wrap us up. If people wanted to follow you and keep up with your progress this season, where can they go to find you on social media?
So all my social medias are the same except for Facebook, but Instagram and Snapchat and everything that I do as Twitter. It's at TCO11INS, and then on Facebook at Tyler Collins Racing. And I usually try and keep up with Instagram and Facebook the most with the racing. And we just kicked off the 2019 season, so we got a lot of big things coming here soon. And we'll be traveling around a lot this year, and I'll be doing a lot of outreach on social media and trying to keep all the fans and people interested in the sport involved as possible.
Cool. And you'll be out this weekend, right?
If all weather permitting and get my car back together in time. Yeah, I had a rough first night. I got a lot of work to do this week, and I got to take the car to Illinois. Another big cost of racing that, I've been forced to spend. My car's not making all the power that it should, and I have to take it to somebody and have it dynoed. So that. I'm one of those weekly guys that I was talking about. I get caught up trying to keep up with the big money, and for right now, where I'm at, financially, I don't have a whole lot of responsibility, so I can almost every dollar that I make can go into this, but at one point it won't be able to. So I'd like to see myself be able to support a family and everything, and still be able to enjoy the sport. But for right now, I'm staying afloat as it is, and trying to keep up with the people who have what I don't have, but we'll try and give them a run for the money while we can.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you for your time, and we'll be seeing you at the track.
Oh, yeah, thanks.